Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very proud to host again at Media Inform TV channel our special guest, prominent American novelist, good friend of mine, Mr. Aaron Charpentier. Good afternoon, Mr. Charpentier.
Hello, Mr. Kацinim. How are you? Thank you for having me again. It's been a while.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much that you agreed to participate in the show. And let's start with, I think, the most important topic, which is now on the agenda. You probably heard that President of Russia, Mr. Putin, he announced in his address to the nation that this is not a bluff, that he is going to use a nuclear weapon in case there is a threat, any threat to Russian territories. So bearing in mind that now Russia tries to organize the fake referendums on the temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories, you are aware of it. What Putin wants to show that he's ready to use nuclear weapon to protect the territories which he's going to annex Ukrainian territories, violating international Ukrainian law. So he's going to, once these territories illegally belongs to Russia, then he's ready to protect them by nuclear missiles. And this is very important because when we say nuclear missiles, it deals not only with Ukraine and Russia. You understand that there is a nuclear parity and no one country actually has the right to violate this, let's say, a consensus between the major nuclear states that a nuclear weapon is not for, let's say, assaulting, it's for defense. And secondly, you can't use nuclear weapon against the state which doesn't have a nuclear weapon. Ukraine doesn't have a nuclear weapon. So the situation is quite dangerous. How can you assess from your side the situation? Do you foresee any bad repercussions or consequences from Putin's speech?
I think he feels that he's backed into a corner, and he's losing land, even though despite the land that he has gained and where he's holding referendums, which by the way is illegal, is against international law, right? Against international norms in the first place. So obviously the West, United Nations, European Union, NATO, none of these organizations accept that land as part of Putin's land. Of course, we would, I don't think that Ukrainians or any European, any Western European countries or North American countries would ever go for, to actually attack Russian land, and I'm talking about, Russia, the country, not the land that it supposedly now holds. I think it's just a way for right now. I just think it's a way for Putin to try to gain upmanship in this long chess game that he's losing. And he knows he's losing. I know that you've seen the UN Security Council meeting recently. The world is for Ukraine. That was apparent. I was able to watch it yesterday, and again, he's losing ground. He's losing the battle. He's losing land. I think that Ukrainians, even a lot of Ukrainian officials, are much more much more confident than he could ever be. What I found reassuring was when I was watching the UN Security Council meeting. The Ukrainian representative said that Ukraine will never give up, basically, and that Ukraine's just going to keep fighting. And one of the representatives in the Ukrainian in the back just smiled, and it was just really a real confident smile. It didn't strike me as really anything else. And so I don't know. I just feel that the Ukrainian people are very confident. I think the government officials are, and I think that Ukraine shouldn't lose momentum. Because Ukraine is winning. Ukraine is going to win eventually. I don't believe that Ukrainians will ever give up, nor should they. And again, I just think that Putin doesn't know what else to do or say. I'm not saying that it's 100% off the table that at some point he won't use some type of nuclear weapon, because he really is unpredictable. And tyrants are unpredictable. So but I can say, generally speaking, and as we, now at least, I think it's just a bluff.
Mr. Shupaltier, I agree with you. You made a right suggestion. It's true that not only Ukrainian representative in the, let's say, Security Council, but generally Ukrainians, they received this message from Putin in very calm way, because Ukrainians now got accustomed to this war situation. The fact that Ukraine is suffering, let's say, from war. And obviously Ukrainians are very proud about Ukraine, because Ukraine is fighting with a much bigger state, and Ukraine is fighting quite successfully. So it's not, let's say, my suggestion. We see that there are many successful operations by Ukrainian forces in Kharkiv region, when Ukrainian forces liberated Kharkiv region for several days. We have some good news in the south of Ukraine, and obviously, let's say, the most persuasive argument that Ukraine fights much better than Russia, and Ukraine, let's say, is winning this war, is the fact that Putin decided to launch a mobilization. And in contrary to Ukrainian station, we see how Russians received this news about mobilization. You probably heard that Russians trying to leave Russia, and that's why prices have gone up for, let's say, flight tickets, train tickets. And as far as you know, on 28th of September, Russia is going to impose a martial law and to close borders. So this is a quite dangerous station for Putin, because, let's say, Ukrainians know what they're fighting for. They fight for independence, they fight for Ukrainian choice. But Russians, they don't know why they're fighting, because this war is not Russian war. This war is totally Putin's war against Ukraine, not Russians' war against Ukraine. And Russians don't want to die, but Putin pushed them to die. So do you foresee, let's say, any possibility that Putin can be, let's say, replaced by someone among Russian elite, that there can be a coup staged against Putin, so Putin can eventually lose the power? Do you foresee such scenario from, let's say, Sunday, 25th of September? Do you foresee such scenario?
Well, yeah. Well, first, let me. I was going to add that too, that he also lost. This is kind of goes with your first question, that he's already basically it looks like he's losing the support of some people. I mean, how many people we could never know. I think it would be impossible, right? Because Putin would never. I'm sure Putin has an idea, but of course, the West would never know, right? How many people actually, are against him. Because I know that there are a lot of people who still support him. I mean, he's been brainwashing the Russian people for over 20 years. And he's definitely been leading everything up to this point in time, the war and all that. So he's been, but I think that there are still a lot of educated Russians that know better. And there are a lot of Russians that have Ukrainian family, right? Or some sort of Ukrainian ties. And I agree with you. I don't think that, I think that Russians know by now that they're not fighting a just war. And I don't believe that educated people in Russia would actually believe that that Ukraine's a Nazi state. I mean, it's just so beyond, exaggeration that it's just almost. I really can't even see how they even brought that to the UN. I mean, it's just. I mean, is that his justification for the war? But no, to get back to your question, do I think that your second question, do I think that Putin will ever lose the support of all the people to the point where they'll overthrow Putin and the current government at this time? Again, it's extremely difficult to tell. I don't think it anytime soon, but I think it's possible in the near future. Because again, we really don't know what's going on in Russia, right? We don't know how many people support him, how many people don't support him, and we don't know which people in power are against him, right? Because he really keeps a tight circle, and I think the Kremlin must be heavily guarded, so I don't think it would. I think it would be very difficult to get at him. So, but it's not impossible.
Mr. Charpentier, you probably know that small changes can involve major differences, and the flutter of butterfly wings can cause that tsunami.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think that this is a huge change now that he's before. I think before the Russian people were just sitting aside and saying, well, this is Putin's war, right? But now it's their war, right? So it's very personal. So I think you're leading to something that you're right. I think this is a major shift in the way that he's operated in the past, and he's desperate, obviously. So he can't just rely on volunteers anymore, right?
Mr. Charpentier, you know that small changes eventually can involve major differences, and the flutter of butterfly wings that can cause, let's say, tsunami in other parts of the world. Obviously, being in the United States, you feel that there is a war between Ukraine and Russia because there's a war on the European continent, which affects at least economically the United States because the prices go up. Obviously, this affects debates around Congress elections, etc. But you know that now the situation has been escalating, so it means that Putin is bringing situation to the bigger scale, let's say. And United States, as well as other Western states, is, let's say, risking to be boiled in this situation even more than they are now. And people in the United States, as well as in the European Union, sooner or later can find themselves in the epicenter of what is going on in the European continent. Obviously, there is a role of the specific person in the history, and we know that, let's say, Putin, he doesn't like Ukraine, he hates Ukraine, obviously. He is the major cause of the war between Russia and Ukraine. But if we take, let's say, if we trace back the history, the First World War, World War II, we know people who were involved in these processes. We know that there were, let's say, many things depend upon specific people who were in charge of different states at the time. But historically, if we look back, the First World War and Second World War, they were inimitable. So this was like, let's say, the history turned up, and let's say history and the pace of history provoked and caused two major world wars in the second century, in the 20th century. You understand what I mean? Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Do you have a feeling that it's like with a person. Sometimes we feel that, we feel like sick, etc., but it can be a sign of some serious trouble with the health. Do you think that the war between Ukraine and Russia eventually is a sign of some serious disease which exists now in the world? And let's say the world needs this terrible war, maybe even for bigger scale, to recover and to, let's say, take another step in its development?
That's a good question. And I think that we really don't know if this could turn into a World War III, first of all. I mean, I think it's unlikely, but I think it's really not impossible. I think it's possible. I think that one thing could just set off one event could just send off a lot of other events that just lead to the war. Because I mean, look at World War I and especially World War II, right? The way World War II started. I mean, it wasn't, it's called the Great War, but it wasn't, I mean, the way it began was just almost, a lot of it had to do with, a student, right? And a leader, and then it just spiraled out into, and it had to do with some countries in Europe that seemed really remote compared to like America, right? And then it became a world war, right? So, I think it could evolve into something bigger. I mean, that's not impossible, and I think that I've heard people speak of and I'm sure you've heard this before too, but I've heard people speak of the United Nations, for instance, as just being really kind of an instrument that just is really symbolic, and it kind of shows, and I'm elaborating now, but it kind of shows, I think, for instance, the recent. I think the recent meeting, for instance, basically just showed where certain countries stood, right, on the Russian invasion. But does it really have a lot of power, right? And as you said, would it take another war for yeah?
Mr. Charpentier, let's speak frankly. We see that United Nations, due to the principle of unanimous voting in the Security Council, which actually now United States try to reverse, because of this unanimous voting, and we know that Russia and China always can block the decision of Security Council. United Nations is lagging behind the history, and unfortunately, it seems that United Nations will inherit the destiny of the League of Nations, which died on the eve of the Second World War. So it seems that United Nations now can't fulfill its statutory provisions, according to which United Nations organization has to prevent the world crisis, has to secure international law and the
and one of its, and I might add, one of its members is part of the organization, and there's nothing that they can do to really to eject Russia from that the organization. So I think that there are a lot of we spoke about this before in one of our interviews. We talked about should another organization be started, right? So we're kind of getting on that topic again, and I think that it might. I don't think it will happen without something as big as a war. A world war. Even if this world war is on a relatively smaller scale than the Great War.
Mr. Charpentier, thank you very much for this interview. I appreciate your time, your efforts, your dedication to talk about, let's say, Russian invasion to Ukraine, and I hope that someday you will celebrate the victory, Ukrainian victory, by visiting Ukraine. Mr. Aaron Charpentier, a prominent American novelist, who was today on a TV show meeting from TV channel Odessa, Ukraine. Thank you very much, Mr. Charpentier.
I'll definitely be back there in a free Ukraine. When? I think that's the big question. But a victory, I'm sure. So I think that the Ukrainian people, and I know they don't need me to tell them this, but I think that they just have to hang in there and keep fighting.
Thank you, Mr. Aaron Charpentier.